Next, we have Matt Hunter. Graduating from the internationally renowned Royal College of Art, Matt has led an illustrious career, including Chief Design Officer and Director for the Design Council, culminating as the co-CEO of PlusX Innovation Hubs. For some, PlusX will be a new name in Brighton, so we'll begin with a short video showcasing them. Then Matt will be focusing on how to deliver impact in this new world. Matt is a massive advocate for innovation, design, startups, and urban regeneration. And with us now more than ever seeing a need for innovation and adaptability, there is no one better placed to help us navigate the evolutionary journey we may need to undertake.
Hello, my name is Matt Hunter, and it's a great pleasure to be at this event today. So I'm a designer by training, and I've been working in the world of innovation for 25 years, and I've worked across the USA and Europe and Asia for startups and corporates and government. Now I'm co-founder and co-chief executive of PlusX, which is building a network of innovation hubs across the UK. Our goal is simple. It's to help ambitious, innovative businesses to grow, and especially to support that growth in regional towns and cities to create more great jobs and economic productivity for those communities. If you think about it, the first support system for highly innovative and entrepreneurial businesses was in Silicon Valley, in the sort of peninsula south of San Francisco. But then the world-class support systems spread to cities such as New York, Boston, then Europe, London, Paris, Berlin. But now we reckon, we're kind of like in a third phase where you don't really need to be based in these global cities to succeed. You can actually be supported to grow great business wherever the talent is. So here's a picture of our new innovation hub in Brighton that hopefully will open next month. And we'll be really excited to see you there. But of course now, in this exact moment, it feels slightly different from one of sort of general innovation and startups. It feels like it's a bit of a crisis we need to respond to. Our businesses have got to survive this shock and then evolve rapidly to meet this new reality. I think the main thing, of course, that many people are talking about right now is that things are not going to go back to normal very quickly. Indeed, maybe normal is likely to be redefined. So therefore, we've got to adapt our businesses to these new constraints and turn them into opportunities. And that's really why I want to talk about design, because design is about shaping the world. It starts by understanding people, their needs and wants. In business, we might call that customer needs. But if my customers are changing, what might that mean for my business? So in this talk, I'm going to explain about sort of current design practices and share a few tools that might help you understand and think and respond in your business. So you might see an opportunity to evolve just a small bit of your business. You might see an opportunity to grow some whole new bit of business. You might see an opportunity to revolutionize and reinvent your entire business. In other words, these sorts of methods and ideas can be used in a very scalable way for evolution or for revolution, whatever is appropriate for you and your situation. One other sort of caveat before I start. In this talk, I'm only going to explore some of the front-end thinking around design that can help to help you identify these opportunities to adapt and improve what you do. How you actually develop those ideas, how you test them, how you take them to scale, that requires more than 15 minutes. But, you know, perhaps one of our +X innovation programs can help you. You know, as I say, we'd be very happy to see you. So first, something about understanding customer needs. For a long time, design practice has incorporated the social sciences, ethnography, cognitive psychology, anthropology, you know, practices for understanding people. And this is because often some of the sort of standard business means of understanding consumers historically, market research, was developed by listening to what people said they wanted. Very large numbers of people, actually. So you got a real truth about what was happening now, but it didn't really necessarily help you understand about the future. And really, to understand the future, you've got to get beyond what people say and really get into what they do and understand how they feel and how they think. You know, that's not easy at times like this because really most ethnography happens out in the field. And the point is that we need to spend time with people, you know, face to face, understanding their lives in context. It's not so easy at the moment, but actually it still is possible to look out into the world and to do sort of almost empathy exercises yourself to heighten ourselves to the way in which attitudes may be changing. A favorite picture that I always use when teaching sort of design thinking is this one. And hopefully you can see that it involves someone opening a pill bottle with a bread slicer. Now, what's important about this is it's a workaround. This person clearly cannot open this pill bottle. They probably can't actually even see the text on the bottle. It's too small as well. But at the very least, they needed help to get into this pill bottle. This tells us there's a latent need, an unmet need, where we need to make better pill bottles, bigger pill bottles that work for people perhaps with slightly weaker hands. You know, great opportunity there. Now, you know, we see lots of workarounds at the moment. People in Italy finding ways to connect with one another across courtyards by singing, you know, doing something incredibly social and collaborative. But at the same time, we see other countries that have perhaps had a different experience with viruses. In this case, looking at China and looking at thermal imaging and wearing of face masks, you know, how does this begin to help us understand how other cultures have dealt with this sort of threat and made it a new normal? At the same time, we could look at extreme environments. We know perfectly well that hospitals, because of hospital-acquired infections, have been very concerned about bacterial and viral cleanliness for a long time. And so we can begin to see what environments look like when they're heightened against disease and against infection. And finally, of course, as I've implied already, we can do things ourselves. Here's a friend of mine, Christian, checking himself into an A&E. It's not until you actually step through a particular experience or process that sometimes you can see it with fresh eyes. And ultimately, when each of us goes out or each of us explores the world around us at the moment in this sort of heightened coronavirus time, we can begin to sense, where are we feeling nervous? What are the key moments where we would want to see adaptation? When we get a delivery of a parcel at home, what does that make us do? So I think what I would urge in general is for all of you to look out at the news reports, look out at other countries, really experience things yourself and try and get a heightened sense of what's going on and how your own attitudes might be changing. And in a moment, I'll talk about how we begin to understand some of the attitudes of others, perhaps. But one of the big challenges of user research is you can get so much information. It's really hard to know what to do with it. And so ultimately, one thing that's really important is the use of frameworks. Frameworks, we might argue, very simple maps. They just help us to sort of hang our ideas on space and then begin to identify areas that we can really focus on and areas perhaps that we don't focus on. So I want to show you a couple of frameworks that I think you might find useful. The first is really one still to do with sort of understanding users, user segmentation. Obviously, a lot of market research is focused on demographics, you know, perhaps our age or our, you know, our type of job or something like that. But actually what I want to talk about here is something a little bit more about sort of skills and attitudes, because we recognize that there's a lot of shifts going on at the moment. Let me explain. For instance, it can be really useful to identify two critical qualities of people that you think at the extremes are meaningful. So at this point, we might say, actually, people who understand, who are comfortable with digital technology can be seen as having very different experiences for people who are not comfortable with digital technology. So we might understand that we might want to be focusing really on making our product or our service, our business, more digital to access those people who are comfortable. But at the same time, we might say, no, actually, we want to help people who are not so digital. Another key dimension I think about at the moment, I suppose, is health. You know, there are people who have identified health vulnerabilities, be they perhaps slightly older, or perhaps they're younger with asthma, or both. And then clearly there are people who maybe have no apparent health vulnerabilities. How do we begin to understand how to design for this? You know, take each of these quadrants. Well, on the one hand, we might take half the chart, as I've said, and I say, right, my business just isn't digital enough. It doesn't matter what people's health status and how they're going to be affected by the lockdown. I just want to make my business go online more. But we might have a different view, which is to say, no, my business is all about looking at the gaps. And I think people with health vulnerabilities that don't have digital confidence and access, that's going to be a real problem. You know, I mean, especially this would be important for GP surgeries or something like that. How do I evolve my service for those people who are particularly vulnerable and not digital in this context? So again, we can begin to make choices. Typically, it can be hard to support innovation in all segments at once. But at least we begin to understand where our priorities are. And the next stage beyond this is to turn this into personas in some way, to understand, to crystallize in more detail what is going on in terms of people's lives. And again, what's quite useful in this context for generating ideas and understanding problems is to look for the extremes, to those people who really are great at understanding digital technology. How are they adapting? And then those people who are really not so good at digital technology, you know, what can we do to reach those perhaps in digital terms harder to reach people? So that's the first framework I wanted to talk about. The second framework is the customer journey. This is the user experience over time. So one thing you can do ultimately, I suppose, is to identify the highs and the lows of your service, what might be called a moodogram. You know, to what extent, as you begin to start, let's say you're running some retail service, you know, how do I find out where you are? How do I begin to understand what you can offer me? How do I select from what you can offer me? How do I purchase it? How do I sort of obtain it in the end? What typically happens with all of this is that you get better bits and worse bits for various reasons, but people can be confused. People can just get stuck. You know, our expectations can be met or not met. And there's a great moment like this, clearly, our normal understanding of how this works has shifted. So one way to visualize it is to say it's about channels. So there's sort of physical stuff at the top here, there's digital stuff in the middle, and there's face-to-face human interactions at the bottom. So perhaps in a classic retail space, I might start online to find that a supplier could do something, walk into the store, then in the middle, I would sort of speak to one of the staff in the store. And then I'd go back maybe to sort of pick up my stuff and package it up and then walk out of the store. And maybe they'd send me my receipt, you know, digitally or something like that. Happens in the Apple store. But one of the key things with all of this, as I've said, is how do you stitch all of that together? My good friend Joe Ferry, former head of Virgin Atlantic, always used to say, get the basics right, but then add moments of magic. So then, how might we add those moments of magic? What are those special moments? Okay, so far so normal. But really, what's happening at the moment is that that's all shifting. So let's give me an example before I go back to the customer journey chart. If we take an extreme context, such as healthcare, often, of course, it's really hard with the basics there. They see themselves as sort of fixing bodies. They don't necessarily see themselves as creating a service. And what we found when I was at the Design Council was actually giving really excellent signage to help people know how to navigate around quite a complex space such as A&E gave a massive, significant effect in terms of the quality of people's experience. Actually, and this was the purpose of the project, it reduces their anxiety and their anger and occasionally violence towards staff. So this is some great work done by Pearson Lloyd. But at the same time, even if we take this very functional, mission critical space, there are moments of magic as well. So we see this at the moment where clinicians and carers are recognizing how intimidating it is for them to have PPE covering their face. They recognize the quality of human interaction that's so important. And so they put on, in this case, the PPE project, they put a smiling face of themselves on the fronts of their shirts. So great example of people thinking hard here about service design, even in very different contexts. So if we go back here to this customer journey chart and see what a normal retail service might have been like, now we can imagine it's shifted. It's become very online, and I might have an interaction with a staff member, via some kind of chat thing. But frankly, maybe all the staff have been furloughed, so that level of customer service is different. So in that case, how do we begin to really make things work effectively? How do we stick in those moments of magic? One thing that we've seen is really moments of the opposite of magic, real frustration. So with Ocado, clearly overloaded technologically, they had massive queuing problems. And here we've got, you are position 17,858 of 17,858. Your wait time will be more than 2 hours. You can imagine how frustrated everyone was, especially those people that had the kind of the premier service, the reserve service, where you got a fixed slot. That was cancelled pretty quickly. So very much not just a sort of technological problem here, but ultimately causing real frustration with user experience. Compare that with a similar queuing challenge from a friend of mine, Gentry Underwood, who created Mailbox, an app that sadly isn't around anymore, but many of its features have been incorporated into Google Mail and others. But when they were switching on the service a few years ago, they began to realize they would have to make people queue. But actually here, you've got 962 people in front of you and 20,863 behind you. So in other words, I'm a bit annoyed that there's 1,000 people in front of me, but actually I've got so many people behind me, I'm beginning to feel like I'm in a good position. So maybe it's a particularly British thing in this case, although it was an American product, but it helps us to feel perhaps a little spark of satisfaction in this case, even though we're in a queue. At the same time, people have been adapting the customer experience in different ways. Some of you will know of Bloom and Wild, a flower company, and actually many others have done similarly since, where we can post flowers through letterboxes. This is powerful, of course, because we like to send flowers to one another. We're not always in, and the last thing we want to do is leave these delicate things on doorsteps. If they're packaged up well and they can go through the letterbox, fantastic, great sense of satisfaction. But now, of course, what we're beginning to see is an awful lot of innovation with letterboxes. Here's Gasson Wines and their letterbox wine. They've actually created a sustainable, they say, flatter bottle that can fit through a UK standard mailbox. So really fascinating stuff, I think, in terms of beginning to show how people are understanding where the new emphasis is in their customer journey and working as quickly as possible to find solutions and patch them together in order to make the whole thing work for this new reality. One of the things we're thinking a lot about at the moment at PlusX is how our programs and how our spaces might adapt. So let me give you 2 examples. So firstly, a virtual conference. I mean, here we are today with a really interesting online event, but it's not quite the same as a real fully fledged physical conference. Now, for those people that know how to do these things, a proper conference would take months, maybe 6 months. Indeed, the guidance here from Belletto says it might even take you a year. And on the right, they've put 14 actionable steps to organizing a conference. For those people who understand how to make an amazing delegate journey and an amazing speaker journey for a conference, realize, as ever, the detail really matters, and you've got to put a huge amount of work in. How do we identify the right speakers? How do we give them the right briefing? How do we make them to make their presentations on time? How do they submit them or, sort of come to the venue? How do we test the technology? How do we sort of calm them down for those that might be feeling anxious? And then the delegates, how do they know where to go? How do they network? How do they really get the maximum out of this, which is as much about listening to things as networking, perhaps? I don't think I've seen or experienced, I'd love to know if any of you have got ideas, of the ways in which conferences have effectively been moved online. there's a massive set of customer journeys here that need to be better developed if really effective conferences, larger scale conferences, can really work online. So we're thinking very hard about our programs, and again, taking our customer experience and really making sure that in just moving it online, we don't say, oh, it'll be fine, let's just do it on Zoom, that we really think through every detail. Secondly, we might think about the physical visitor experience in our Brighton hub. As I walk in as a new person, what are the house rules? Normally we don't ask the question, what should I do to be a good visitor or a good member here? But now the rules really matter, like being in a hospital. So how do we present those? How do we remind people of those and communicate of those? Maybe I don't want to use the lift. That's a bit enclosed. Well, how do I find the stairs and how do I feel great about the stairs? Good news in our building is we want to encourage people to use the stairs for health reasons anyway. We've got local artists to paint the stairs and to make an exciting space with great sounds recorded by a startup that we've supported over the years. But again, we need to make everyone feel really confident about that. Where do I clean my hands? Of course, we'd signpost the bathrooms, but people will be more anxious than ever before at key moments to make sure they're as clean as possible, their hands are as clean as possible. Perhaps there might be emergencies. What's the equivalent of the first aid kit? Can you supply me a mask, perhaps, because I'm not feeling well? How would you get to hospital? So what are those new emergency protocols that we need to factor in? Are there emergency first aid kits, as I say, that we need to construct? And finally, I was thinking, about the washrooms, the loos, the toilets in motorway service stations, these real high pressure places that sometimes don't feel very clean. Well, of course, they have a schedule that says when this was last cleaned, if you believe the schedule. Now, will we have to see this in all of the kitchenettes, all of the toilets, that we have a very clear sense of when this was last cleaned? So as I say, that's some of what we're thinking about. But the final one I wanted to talk about before summarizing, I think is exceptionally important. And this is saying that if we think of customer experience and services as theatre, of course we've got front of stage, but we've got back of house as well. What actually does it take to make this happen? And the staff, be they front of stage or back stage, are incredibly important. So again, we're beginning to see, perspex partitions here on buses, in stores, in all customer service spaces, because maybe it's really hard to give service with a smile when you're wearing a mask. Now, clearly we have to wear masks in hospital, but are we going to see a slightly different adaptation more widely? So how do I feel safe as an employee, as well as helping my customers to feel safe? This is equally as important as the customer journey, the employee experience. So I just wanted to summarize, really. Hopefully you found this stimulating. I think I would ask you to consider, how do I really understand my customers, even if I can't get out to sort of speak to them in person? What can I do to look around and do this kind of anthropological digging around to understand how people's attitudes are changing? How can I look in different countries? Do I need to prioritize key segments and key attitudes? Can I sort of pull my potential customers apart to understand those ones I want to focus on? How has my customer journey shifted between channels, and where might the new breaks be? And how can I fix those broken bits? Can I steal ideas from other industries and other contexts to make that happen? Don't forget to deliver delight. What can I do, even in this context, even when I'm under pressure, to put in that special touch? That matters perhaps more than ever. You see that in hospitals as well, as I showed. And finally, how do I make it work for my team? My team are the people who are going to help this business get through it. We must make sure that I'm not sacrificing their quality of work life in order to get things done. We know how horribly that's feeling at the moment in care situations and health situations at the moment. I hope that's all been useful. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much for watching. And if you want to find out more about PlusX, please follow these links. Thanks very much.